Welcome back to XR at Work. I'm Scott,
And I'm Dane.
and we are two guys who put headsets and handhelds on the heads, in the hands of factory workers in manufacturing. If you found this podcast and you're in oil and gas or construction or logistics, you're amongst friends. This is for everybody who works in industrial environments. Before we start, we like to always say what Dane and I say here is our opinion, right, Dane?
Yep.
This is not our employers, right? So we like to kind of throw that caveat out. So today we're going to talk about scalability. Everyone loves when we have a big win, a home run. We hit a big win in a factory with a headset or a couple of headsets, or maybe even a group of factories. We have a pilot that goes well, but then somebody wants us to go start scaling that out, and we go, wait a minute, that's a different game, right? I mean, what's your experience been with this thus far, Dane, in your day job?
Yeah. So as you said, when you're kind of prototyping and you're first deploying things, it's relatively easy because it's very one-to-one. You can manage it effectively, and then you kind of hit the scale piece. And I would argue that that's probably even like an order of magnitude more difficult, to scale a product. And so you're right. There's a proverbial kind of gray cloud that hangs over you after you get that first win, because you have to figure out how to make this work across the board for a lot of different people. So I think there's a few different things that are important to consider when you're starting like the scaling process. I think a good place to start is probably management of your headsets, depending on what the devices are. So one thing I was actually going to ask you is, what are you guys using to manage your devices? Do you have like, the silver bullet, that you can manage every XR device that you have, or do you have multiple different tools that you use?
Well, that's a softball question, right? Because you know dang good and well my beliefs on this, right? And that is that the endpoint management group who manages all of our phones and tablets and laptops, right? They're not designed or set up or experienced to be able to now take on RealWare, which is a different Android device, or a mixed reality, version of Windows that runs on a HoloLens 2. These sorts of devices, they're different devices, and we have a great endpoint management group who I enjoy a good relationship with, and they try to take on managing my devices, as it were, the augmented and virtual reality devices, but it's tough for them, right? And so we end up having kind of a smattering of different platforms to manage different types of devices. What about you guys?
Yeah, we have the same thing, and I wish that there was that silver bullet right now. And even if there was a silver bullet in the XR space, you still have multiple MDMs that you're using.
Yeah.
And so, if you're a large enterprise, generally you're trying to consolidate around one MDM, or mobile device management platform. And so, like for us, it's Intune. And
We use
Intune's great.
Intune as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so Intune's great for managing phones and tablets and all the fun stuff like that. You run into challenges, like you said, though, when you have offshoot versions of Android that are used for headsets and HoloLenses and all that kind of stuff. So we, similar to you guys, end up with like Oculus for Business, for instance, is a great example on how we manage VR headsets. And there's a bunch of other mobile device management platforms that can be used for AR headsets. We haven't really gotten into using a fully managed system that's like Manage XR, or any of the the platforms that are out there that are designed to manage many different types of devices.
Right.
Just because we get new devices all the time. Some of the platforms support some headsets and then not others, and so
Right.
like even if we were to consolidate on one, it may not encompass everything that we're working on, and then you just introduce more mobile device management systems. And so it's been a challenge. Now that said, I will say I don't think it's possible, or it's extremely painful to scale without a mobile device management platform
Oh, sure.
of some sort. And so I do think that having someone trained on the team or having someone responsible on a team is really important. Once you get to an area where like you have a bunch of headsets deployed. And well, I'm gonna make an attempt here to put us in a box a little bit.
Okay.
How do you guys start to think about scaling out resources, as you scale, like timeline versus kind of resources type of conversation?
So like, when do we start to think about, okay, what we've been doing is not going to work for us, we're going to have to step it up in these different areas? Yeah, I mean, for us, it's been like, we have a lot of things in place. Sometimes it's an MDM, sometimes it's a process, sometimes it's another group that does something for us that has gotten us to where we are at. I'll just call it to tens or dozens of implementations, and we've realized that some other things that we're doing barely work now, and they're definitely not going to work as we start to scale. So first thing I'll say is that we do a lot of spreadsheets, right? I don't know if you guys, but I mean, and everyone tells me they're doing spreadsheets. They don't want to admit it, right? But I got a spreadsheet for what version of what application is running on what headsets, and oh, Frank's running that too old of a version. Somebody call him. We got to update that. So there's a lot of that. But I'll tell you, we've identified some of those things that aren't going to work. But I think to your point, to your question, we have a few people that have done a good body of work, and the reason why we consider ourselves to be now in this mode of scalability and needing to scale is because for us, we noticed it when we were being asked to do more faster, right? So what we've done has gotten us, let's say, one headset a month for general purposes, or for conversation's sake. We can do one headset a month. The two of us or the three of us could do one headset a month in factories. And now all of a sudden it's like, all right, we need 4 a month. Okay, well, that's, and we're pushing to 50 or 100 or several hundred. So now it's like, okay, what we've been doing isn't going to work, especially in the spreadsheet portion of that.
Yeah, well, and then you have multiple spreadsheets depending on the teams that are using them and who's responsible, and so it's really tough to manage, especially one thing about scale that's good is that it allows you to get advantage pricing. And I'm not even talking about like saying, oh, you get 15% off if you buy this many licenses. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like if you're paying to develop content, then that amortized across 1,500 people as opposed to 500 people or 100 people. It gets a lot cheaper when you start to scale from a content perspective. And so you almost have to, it's this kind of weird dynamic where in the very beginning, and we've talked about some of these use cases like remote assist and guided workflows, you have to find some really valuable use cases to drive adoption of these things. And then you can start to look at, okay, what makes sense when we scale it to a bunch of people. So for instance, fire extinguisher training, it may not make sense to go and spend, we'll just put a round number of $100,000 to build a fire extinguisher training in VR if you're going to give it to 10 people. But if you deploy it across the entire organization, well, suddenly that becomes really valuable because you can actually train people in a new way and get better content and all that stuff. And
economies of scale, that's what I've heard it called, right? You get these economies of scale.
Yep, exactly. And so that's where scalability is super important, because it enables you to do different use cases than even you would have been able to do beforehand. So I think we've beat the dead horse on the MDM.
Well, yeah, because I think I was just going to say, I think when you talk scalability, everybody starts with kind of like where we started with, right? Which is devices and applications. How am I going to get more of them in the field and support them and train people on them, right? That's kind of a logical place to start. But you and I've talked about this, Dane. There's a lot more than just getting more devices with software on them out to more factories. Once you start doing this, right, there are other things that you've got to think about, like How are you going to train these people, right? The way the way we trained our first handful of factories, we drove to the factories and we stood there with them and trained them how to use it. Now, travel restrictions, scalability concept, right? How do we do more of that where the training is self-service by the end users, and it didn't require me to either drive there or me to even be on a Teams call, right? So that's another thing that goes along. Those things you got to think about.
Yep. Well, so I think for us, really good documentation is
Yeah.
underrated. I think, nobody, well, I don't want to say nobody, right? But I think generally the technologists in the space are really excited about, like, let's get a new headset out there. Let's test this new thing. Let's do all this. And it's not as exciting to sit down and write out like a document on, how you use it. But
Yeah.
I tell you what, from a scale perspective, that's a super important part of this role, is the kind of the technical writing piece and being able to and actually also I'm interested if you guys have this problem too. Like, this is so visual that it's hard to write in a document, right? And so you end up having to take screenshots out of like the headset and things like that, so that when people jump in there, they kind of know what to expect and they're not, blindsided by a new experience. Do you guys have that same?
Absolutely. Did we just talk about this last week? Because this was happening to me last week. Is, people want to take, okay, so they'll say, okay, Scott, so when you go teach someone how to do that, right? How to get into the HoloLens 2 and start up Dynamics guides and consume a guide. Can you take that whole thing and just put it in like a PowerPoint or put it in a Word doc? And then now we can just take that doc and post it on the internet. And now nobody has to ask you any questions. They can just go read the doc. And I'm like, guys, it didn't work like that, right? I mean, some very commoditized, simple set of instructions will work.
Mhm.
But by and large, I feel my experience, and I would welcome yours, and people in the audience, I'd welcome your feedback on this. I still stand by, it's just not that simple, right? And if it were just that simple, right, as well, here's your PowerPoint on how to go do XR in your factory, well then, well, it wouldn't be emerging tech, right? It would be non-emerging tech.
Well, I
Are you
think,
struggling with that too?
yeah, yeah. So I think it's hard to distill the same experience reading a PowerPoint into, or distill the same experience that you have in a VR headset into explaining it on a PowerPoint.
Right.
It's sort of like telling somebody how to drive a race car as opposed to driving a race car, right?
Yeah.
They're very different experiences. And so I think one thing that helps us with that a lot is to rely on introductions within the headset. So like when you put on the headset, like Oculus, for example, has their first steps,
right,
thing that you can go through. And that's super helpful because, it sounds funny because you're shooting
rockets and blimp and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but from the kind of tactile perspective of learning how to use the device, it's super helpful. And so like most of the time, we won't even jump directly into training. We'll put somebody through kind of that beginner type of, training, to get started.
Right. So we got devices going out. They've got software apps on there. We're doing some method of training, right? Which I know, and I think you brought up a great point. It's not sexy stuff. Nobody wants to do it. They want to go put the new headsets out there, right? They want to work on the bleeding edge of emerging technology. But the fact is that when you're going to go scale something, there's a lot of grunt work that has to happen that nobody wants to do just to keep that foundation laid of documentation and instructions, and here's your support protocol, here's your call. There's all kind of stuff that nobody wants to mess with because it's not the super cool stuff, but it has to happen if you're going to go take and productize or push out in a scalable fashion technology like this.
Well, one thing too is we rely a lot on the documentation that the vendors maintain as well. So
Great
like
point.
the startup guides that they create and all that stuff. So I think in order to create a good document, like if you have to create a document just for ease of being able to send it to people and all that stuff, but actually pulling from the reference documents of the vendors is super helpful because generally there's pictures and stuff like that too. So generally the first places we go are is there a tutorial that's already on the device, and what documentation does the vendor already have, and then we kind of
Right.
create our own documents around that.
Now, once you get the next 10 or 20 or 30 sites done, right, and you've got them devices there, software, you got everyone trained, do you just leave them your cell phone number, or like how detailed do you guys get with that support plan for kind of the emergency response, or that kind of that help desk kind of functionality? How prescriptive are you guys with that?
Yeah, so our strategy on that, and it depends really on what the device is, but our strategy on that has been to build relationships with the vendor that we're working with, so that like technical issues can be, to a certain extent, the sites can reach out to them directly and say, hey, I'm having this problem where like my camera won't turn on or something. Like, I'm not going to be able to probably fix that if it's a hardware issue, and so it's better to kind of directly say, in the case of hardware issue or software issue, reach out to our success rep at whatever company that we're working with.
Okay.
And then in a situation where it's like, I need to order more headsets, I need help with understanding what the strategy is for the future. The less kind of device centered help, our team kind of fields a lot of that feedback.
So we are not where we want to be with this notion, right? It tends to be a lot of the same way you got in touch with me to start this program is the same way you're going to get in touch with me to get help when you have problems, right? But we're trying to be better stewards of some of those resources, like you guys are doing, to use those for support.
Yeah, I think scale is just a lot about structure too. Are all the documents that you need in one place? Are the people's names that you would need to get a hold of, named in their email or whatever, next to them? And like I said, that's not, organization isn't sexy a lot of times,
right.
but it's important for kind of navigating that scale. One thing, do you guys like, what's your experience been like, procuring devices? Like, do you guys have a standard procurement process?
Yeah, it's the same thing, right? It's what we've been doing is not scalable, right? So we're trying to, it used to be, I bring it out to you, you like it, okay, well, here, keep it in the plant, and I'll just go charge, I'll have, either I'll pay for it or I'll charge your cost center on the back end. We went from that to how many do you need? Here's a form you need to fill out online. We use ServiceNow or something like that, for device ordering. And we're starting to get more so into where you can just go to a catalog on our company intranet and say, or you can go to our SharePoint site for our XR initiatives and group here at our company, and you can say, remote expert, and it says, all right, you want handheld or head mounted? I want handheld. Do you have phones or do you need phones? Well, I have phones. What do you have? All right, well then boom. So then we kind of drill down a little bit like that, but it's still where we need to work on. And I use it's not a beautiful analogy, but I say a lot of times where even though we let them order their own HoloLens 2, we get a notification when they order it, and before it gets approved, I jump in and call them and say, hey, what are you trying to do, right? And so we still have a lot of kind of manual stop gaps in place, but we're trying to move towards self-service. What about you guys?
Yeah, no, I would say we're very similar to you. I think a challenge, with how fast the space moves is, and this is a problem with scale too, if you're looking at multiple devices, is how do you get those devices onto ServiceNow or whatever platform it is that you use? So what some of the things that we're looking at is like, can you kind of templatize the things that we ask the vendors? So we say, what are the specs of your device? What's the lead time on your device generally? These things. And so when if we decide that, hey, we want to go and scale this thing, we just send them like a list of 10 questions. They respond, we send it to the team,
Yeah.
they get it put on there, all that stuff.
Sure.
But like even within the space, there's difficulty because like, I know I'm talking about Oculus a lot today, but like, you have your Oculus and then you have your Oculus for business.
Yeah.
And if you put in like a non-standard hardware request and you just say, like for instance, Scott, if you were at one of the plants and I said, hey, Scott, I want you to go and order an Oculus Quest 2 for VR training, and they put it into non-standard and don't specify enterprise. Well, now they end up with a consumer device. They have to ship back and then get, go through all that stuff. And so, I think we're kind of in the same place where, there's growing pains associated with
not
it.
where we want to be eventually.
Yeah.
But it's kind of where we are now. Yeah.
But I will say, for vendors who are looking to support customers and all that stuff, having a description of your product as if it was listed on Amazon is very helpful, for consumers or I guess industry consumers to get it onto their service.
So once the devices are out, the people are trained, they got their software, right? They know who to call if they have questions, right? The work is done, right?
Yeah. No, I think, you and I were kind of talking about this, is the trade-off for scalability is really what your time frame is that you want to execute on. And the amount of devices that you have is kind of like the matrix that I would say, you have to look at. And so, you can actually support quite a few devices with a small amount of people if you're willing to wait a while. And so like, I think we're kind of both in this situation, Scott, where we've deployed, headsets slowly, and we're supporting quite a few, headsets in reference to how big the team is. But it's taken, like you said, like once a month or whatever the cadence is over time.
Yeah.
And so like when you're looking at this, if you're, new to the space or you're looking to scale right now, I think the consideration is, if you have 1 month to deploy 500 headsets, you're not doing that with 3 people.
Nope. No.
And but if you want to do like 100 or so over the course of 2 years, or whatever, it might be doable and
doable.
Take more time, but it's going to take up a lot of your time.
Right. It's something that takes up a lot of time. Whereas once you have devices, my experience, Dana, is once you got devices in the field, it's not just, okay, well, those 10 factories are good, let me move on to the next 10. You carry on with you a tail, right? You carry on 5 to 10 hours a week worth of support for the ones you just did. So you don't have the same amount of time and resources available for the next round of deployments, because now you got to support the last round or the last 2 rounds or last 3 rounds. So every time you go deploy, you take on more work. And if you don't offload that support, like we're talking about, to someone else, then you end up being the one that takes all the calls to help the people from last week or last month, and it's distracting for what you're trying to do. And so that, you explained it with kind of that peak where you go and you ramp up and you deliver, and then the activity in that plant drops off, but it doesn't drop back down to 0. It only drops off down halfway or so and stays steady, because everything you go plant, you got to take care of. You got to water and feed and seed and take care of it, right? And now you get to where you have so much that you've done. That's kind of the point to where we're getting, is we've got so much that we have done that if we don't pay attention to it and support those guys, then adoption goes down to nothing, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a very delicate balance. And I also think especially in this space, you always kind of want to have somebody who's not just thinking about maintenance, all day long. You want to have a person who's looking at all the news and saying, what if we could do this? And so to your point, like you have to kind of, bring on resources and start, thinking about expanding the team as you get to that place. Cause like, you don't want to be the guy that's like, 2 or 3 years down the line supporting 100 HoloLens ones, because you just focused on that the entire time, right?
I don't. Maybe you do, but I don't.
No.
So, you can maybe talk, someone new in the business coming on your team into doing that, right, to kind of pay their dues. But eventually they're going to get tired of that as well. They want to go work on the cool stuff, the new implementations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and the new stuff is as long as you've matched it with good use cases and stuff, it's
Hmm.
probably worth the investment. And so
Right.
that's actually that's a good topic to talk about too, is continuity between like like we bought a bunch of Oculus, again back to the Oculus, bunch of Oculus
You're all
Quest.
about the Oculus today, man. Is
I
Meta
know.
sponsoring this? They
No, yeah,
should be.
no, yeah, but no, I think so like we deployed a bunch of Oculus Quest ones, and then
Yeah.
the Quest 2 comes out, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's a pretty HoloLens is a great example too,
Yeah. Between
where
one and two. Yeah.
man, big difference,
Yeah.
right, between HoloLens 1 and 2. And so it made sense to make the jump and start deploying HoloLens 2s, but you're kind of restarting that curve all back over again
Yeah.
because you have to retrain people. And if there's, it's great if there's interoperability between the generations, but if there's not, then you have to go back and, rework tools and all that
Right.
stuff. And um,
So I tell people, like, I know you just got a puppy,
yep.
right? And so what a joy that is, right? I mean, but it's I always tell people, right? This technology sometimes can be like, you know, like getting a new puppy. It's all cute and all, when you first bring it home, but eventually it grows up into a teenager, a full-grown dog that just, man, they eat a lot and they
Yeah.
do a lot. Yeah, and so it's like you got to take care of that. It's the same thing here, right? It's all fun and games in the beginning, cool new stuff. And look, I can use my fingers, this device and stuff. But man, there's work that comes with that, and when some of the newness wears off, there is an amount of work that has to happen for the long haul.
Yeah, well, I think another important thing to call out is that it's important to kill off projects that aren't working too.
Why? I agree, but why do you say that, Dane?
Yeah, well, so again, this space is moving so fast, right?
Yeah.
They, what was really good a year ago may not be really good today, and so I think businesses in general tend to hang on to things just because it's
Yeah.
what people are used to. It's and there's obviously a balance. Like you don't want it to be a flavor of the week kind of thing where
Right.
people are like, I'm not going to learn it because next week it's going to be a new thing. But it is important to go back and a lot of times it sucks pretty bad because it was your baby, right, for a couple
Yeah.
of years and you were trying, but it's important to go back and cut that off because you can free up the resources who are tied up in doing this
Yep.
thing that's no longer valuable and move them, into the newer stuff. And
Yeah.
so
Have you had to go back to plants and say, hey, you're not using this? How do we increase usage utilization, or we're going to have to pull it? And have you had to pull it from a plant because they're just not using it?
we haven't had to pull anything yet, but there's definitely, especially in the beginning, there's definitely a fair amount of like, you have to find the right person who's out of sight,
Yeah.
who's excited about it and passionate and willing to kind of push it through. And then it's funny because like once you find that person, the productivity or the engagement goes way up, and then it
Yeah.
starts to like slowly taper
Right.
off. And so I
Right.
think that constant touch base is important too. Have you guys had to do that?
We've not, only in very rare cases have I mean, very rare, like maybe one, had to go back and say, okay, you're not using it, right? Those free licenses that we provided you, you're going to have to start covering those costs if you want to keep this technology. So we've had to do some of that. The big thing that we have done though is we made a shift, right? When I first started out years ago, I used to go kind of proverbially knock on doors at factories and say, hey, you ever heard of a HoloLens 2? Hey, what do you think about, doing FaceTime on your head, And I mean, so I had those conversations. I will say that when I was knocking on door to door trying to convince people to use it, we had much lower adoption. Even if they
Mm,
said it was great, right, when I was there, they didn't use it. We had much lower adoption than we have now, because now we're in a little bit of a more advantaged position several years into it, where people call us, right? And it's like, okay, if you're serious enough to call us and you want this, you heard about this, you saw this, you've got a real good solid use case, you're willing to pay for it, you've got power users identified, you've got Wi-Fi in the factory, we see much better adoption and much better utilization than when we were going trying to talk them into doing it, right? So I imagine you've seen kind of some of the same thing, right, Dane?
yeah, well, and I think a tip that I would give to people too is, I don't know, it's going to be different for everybody, but like we use Yammer internally, right?
Oh
Which
yeah,
is
yeah,
like
yeah.
the equivalent of like Facebook for internal, to a company. And something that we found that was a good lesson for us is that create a community on Yammer and then share the stuff that you're doing at the various sites on Yammer so everybody can go on there and see it, and then they can ask you questions, right? And so it kind of creates a place that people can go for the newest updates or learning about the new applications, things like that. And they're not like, everybody doesn't have to email you. They can just kind of see like, oh, the XR team published this week, and this is
Yeah.
what they're working on.
So do you use that? Do you use Yammer to kind of read the comments and see kind of what some of the beefs
Yep.
are, some of the bad feedback, so you know what you need to clean up, that sort of thing, right? So you kind of spy in on that, kind of like
Yeah.
product reviews.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I think uh, anytime you can sit in a room and just listen to users, even if they're venting, that's the best. And actually, you know what I like? I like going into a room where people don't know that I'm responsible for the XR stuff
Yeah.
and hearing the feedback,
Right.
right? Because you'll generally it'll be a mix of good and bad, but hearing how people are thinking about the technology is really important, I think, for being able to craft the message that's valuable to them.
And I think this goes along with what we're saying today about scalability, right? Is that if you're going to continue scaling, you've got to be refining, you got to be getting better, faster, smarter in future phases. And a big way to do that, one way, right? One of the many ways, is to see how well are people delighting in what you've given them thus far, and
Yep.
learning from some of those mistakes, or some of those, because you and I both know that you're going to make mistakes, right? And if we don't learn from those, then we don't do better as we grow.
Yeah, well, and there's so many different areas where you can get feedback too. Like it could be, oh, this headset's too heavy on my head,
Yeah.
or it could be, the type of button that you have in your user interface isn't good, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think it's important to listen to the end user kind of start to finish in the experience, because you can draw out so much understanding, and also, like, if you make your UI intuitive, then it reduces the problems that you're going to have,
Yeah.
because people just can use it. They don't have to, it's not, I don't want to call anybody out, but there are ERP systems that are hard to use.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so, like, if you can make it intuitive, then they can just throw it on
Right.
and use it. And there's not a whole lot of training that's needed.
So here's a loaded question, Dane. Have you had this experience where you put a device and some software out, pretty simple, or maybe it's too advanced for them, and then they go, I don't understand this. This doesn't work. XR sucks. Nobody should use this, right? So, I mean, I've had these experiences, right? But have you seen this where maybe you put something out, they're not properly trained, or they show someone else and they try it, and next thing you know, you got the blind leading the blind, and the next thing you know, there's a mutiny going on where it's like, XR, that doesn't work. No, it works. You just weren't properly trained. You didn't take your time. You took on too much too fast. I mean, what's your experience been with that? Because it hurts scalability. It hurts adoption.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think in those instances, like, again, it's kind of back to getting like the user feedback and saying, well, what sucks about this, and is this something we can fix? And then if it's something that we can't fix, then I think we go to the next step, which is, so is this something that you guys will still use if we can't fix XYZ, for you? Right. And if not, then it's just kind of like the breakup. But
yeah.
The thing for me in those situations that are important is letting them know, hey, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
This isn't going to be the last time that you see AR technology.
Nope.
And so, all that I ask is, I know that this didn't work for you, but in future iterations, keep an open mind, and see if there's something that we can. And I've had situations where people are like, I don't think I want to use that. And then you come back with a different headset or a different tool, and they're like, oh, okay, I can see that. And they start using it. So I think people generally are pretty easy, or not easy. People are pretty open-minded, especially if you emphasize and say, like, this is brand new, right? Like we're just testing this out. People are generally pretty lenient. What's your
Right.
experience been in that
Yeah,
space?
it's interesting because we have a lot of objections, a lot of things that people will bring up, right? Oh, I tried, I'm walking in with a HoloLens and they're like, oh, well, I tried PlayStation VR 7 years ago. All right,
Yeah.
so let me show you why this is different, right?
Yep.
So you have to do a lot of, my experience is you have to do a lot of kind of coaching, a lot of handholding, a lot of conversations. Hey, what if we try this with a tablet first? Let me show you how this works on tablet. And if you ever want to go to hands-free, we've got a solution for that as well. And
Yep.
sometimes if you just kind of meet people where they're at,
Mhm.
you can give them some simple technology, bring some value, it's easy to use. Where I do see problems is where I or other people have tried to take on too much too quick. Listen, I love, mixed reality head mounted devices, but that doesn't mean I need to put every dude or lady in a factory, in the middle of nowhere into the HoloLens 2, right? It's too much too quick. You got to meet people where they're at, and then
Mhm.
you end up not scaring them off, right? Because you want them to be around for the long haul. I think you brought up a good point, Dana. You want to get them in the fold for continuing to grow the technology that they use.
I also think kind of one last thought on the organizational piece is I think if you spend time training more than just one person to be the subject matter expert, then you buy yourself some insurance in
Mm,
that, like, you don't have that one guy that leaves and then like so
right,
does all of XR for
right. For that
facility.
plant, yeah,
And so that's the other thing I would recommend is if you're looking to scale, focus on making it a team effort instead of like an individual effort.
right.
Individuals can light the spark, but getting it institutionalized is really, uh, really where it's at, because then, and also getting it into work practices.
Yeah,
So like when you're bringing in trainees, if you can put them in the HoloLens like the first week, it makes it a lot easier because they're already, it's
right.
everything's new. And so it's not like, oh, I've been here for a super long time and now I'm trying to learn something
Yeah,
brand new.
yeah. So it's a
So
big thing right now. Everyone I talk to, you and I, of course, when we first met, we sat down and had a dinner and talked about this a lot, right? It's you get some wins, there's a lot of excitement, and it's like, oh, crud, how do I go grow this, right? Because the tools that I'm using are not scalable. The processes I have are not scalable. That spreadsheet's not going to get me to the next level.
yep.
But we're experiencing some growing pains and some growing joys. And it sounds like you guys are as well. So I think there's light at the end of the tunnel for anyone that's watching this that may be going, oh my gosh, how am I going to scale this, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and what I would say too is if any one of you guys that are interested in scaling out and have watched this, if you're experiencing the same things, reach out to Scott and I. We're always happy to
Absolutely.
talk XR.
Always. We could talk your leg off. Dane, it's good to talk to you. Let's do some breakout sessions or some deeper dives into maybe some of these topics in the future. Device management, some of these processes, training power users. How do you train a power user? What's a good power user or a good super user? I think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about. I hope this kind of got everyone excited about it. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. Like Dane said, we'd love to talk to you further. Until next time.